president may call for new jobs, but it's up to business to actually create those jobs. All right, let's ask our next guest, what's it going to take to get businesses to bring on some new workers? We have Albert Angrisani. He's the chairman, chief executive of Angrisani Turnarounds. He's also the former assistant secretary of labor under President Reagan. And we have Jack Hidary, chief executive of Samba Energy, a leading solar energy company. He joins us from San Francisco. He's just back from 3 weeks in China. All right, Al Angrisani, set the stage for us. We know that private industry is what is supposed to be creating jobs. But as Christina Romer was just describing, she says there's no demand. There's not enough demand to get the economy going. So in those times, you turn to the government in order to create at least some temporary demand. No?
Well, no. I remember being in the White House in 1980, having this very conversation about how do we stimulate demand, how do we create growth, how do we get people back to work. And the one thing that came out of Murray Wiedenbaum and David Stockman and all the people around President Reagan and the president himself that I'm not hearing right now is the concept of let's get the animal spirits going again as it relates to wealth creation in the country, particularly small business. And that's exactly what we did that's not happening now. That's the
when
way
you say animal
jobs.
spirits, I mean, what does that end up translating into in terms of real everyday, business opportunity?
Well, if you look at the program that came out of 1980-83, that concept of stimulus, large cuts in the marginal tax rates, which affected small business owners. They paid less taxes so they could reinvest it in their business, and then significant cuts in the capital gains taxes so that they could keep what they made. That's the concept of wealth creation that we embraced, which gave people the appetite to take risk, invest in their own business, and create jobs. Not what we're seeing today, which is stimulus from Washington, which is never created permanent jobs.
Jack Hidary, come in on this as someone who's started businesses, sold businesses, started new businesses, tax policy and job creation. Would a change in taxes really spur jobs?
It depends which tax you're talking about. The payroll tax that's being bandied about that the president may talk about tonight, cutting that, I don't think that's really the most effective policy we need right now. Why not go right to the heart of the issue? Capital gains tax cuts on investment in new and small businesses. That's a far more effective policy than trying to end run it with a payroll tax cut. That's proven not to be as effective. Second, there is demand out there in various sectors, for example, in IT. The problem, Pimm, is that there's a mismatch between the folks that are available for employment and the jobs. There are 3 million job postings right now for folks to get jobs, but we don't have the skill sets out there. That mismatch, that's part of why we have high unemployment today.
Al Angrisani, a mismatch, skills versus the jobs that are available. That doesn't sound like it needs a tax cut in order to be solved.
No, that's correct. I agree with what Jack said. If we talked about it on your last show that I was on, that there are 4 million unemployed, and I talked about the private industry councils that President Reagan created, where we married private enterprise, the labor unions, and state government at the local level to create apprenticeships that move people, transition from structurally unemployed to employed. That's a tactical thing that worked very well for us with the tax cuts, and I agree exactly with what Jack said. The most important of all the tax cuts is the capital gains tax cut.
All right, well, Jack Hidary, go ahead.
Pimm, let me just further clarify that. And I agree with Al in terms of those kinds of job trainings to get the skills matched up. When we look at capital gains, there's two kinds of capital gains we have in this country. Capital gains on just buying and selling stock. That's not the capital gains tax cut we're talking about here. That does not create and add value to the economy. We are talking about capital gains on investment dollars, venture capital, angel investment, growth capital, that kind of capital. That's where we need a tax break right now. For any company, any investment for the next 3 years, we should have a capital gains tax cut on those new dollars. That will spur real innovation, not just building roads. And that's another thing. I really hope we don't see just another, quote, highway roads program. That is not going to be what we need right now.
Well, Jack Hidary, I mean, what kind of jobs program or job retraining do you think that the government can come up with? I mean, it's been almost 2 years since the president laid out his first effort to deal with the recession. What are we going to get? Some kind of education process?
Well, again, the first thing you have to do is really spur investment in growth companies. Out here in Silicon Valley, in Austin, Texas, in Atlanta, in New York City, we have Raleigh-Durham. We have great growth centers around the country. We've got to spur investment in those growth centers. That is proven to create jobs in the small, medium enterprise sector. Number two, we have sectors like the clean tech sector, solar and energy efficiency. Right now, the solar sector employs 50,000 people. But because of the new low prices of solar, we can actually employ 400,000, 500,000 people in that sector if we got the job training to match that. And that's a combination of private and public dollars to make that happen. That is a much better program than just going out and building more roads for gas cars. Then we have to import more oil and be more dependent on foreign entities.
Margaret, give us a little bit of the political calculus of the president's speech tonight. $300 billion, that seems to be the number that's being talked about right now that would be spent on various jobs programs. Is there any hope that the Republicans would support such a deal?
There's not much hope. Let's say he comes in at $295 billion, and it looks like it's on sale. It could be why the $300 billion is out there so much. Congress the Republican House is not disposed towards giving any more money to the president to create jobs. It's not in their political interest, and they're deficit hawks. They're against spending. There's this minor program. It's called the Older Americans Retraining Act, and I was listening to your other guests. It was money to retrain people laid off in their 50s to take these newer jobs that you need to have actual skills for, as in the solar industry. But that was cut. So, when you go to my hometown of Camp Hill, Pennsylvania, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, you see, 55-year-old men flipping hamburgers. It's a kind of sad sight. They were in middle management, but they're not up to date in their skills, and there's no money to retrain them. That's the Congress that we're dealing with.
Well, if that's the Congress that we're dealing with, Margaret, Carlson, what's the chances that the president will be able to leapfrog the contentious attitude in Congress and go right to the public with his speech tonight?
Well, thus the speech tonight. He is going to try to go over the heads of Congress and go straight to the public tonight. Here's how bad things are. Remember, last week there was just a huge spat over when is the speech going to happen. This is like deciding on the shape of the table for peace talks. This is where we are in Washington, D.C. You want it this night? Oh, no, you can't have it, and making a big deal out of it. When as best I can tell, the White House simply said, okay, well then how about the next night? Also, there are lots of Republicans making a point in the House saying they're not going to show up tonight. Remember, I think about 7 months ago, there was a joint address to Congress, and there was a moment when congressmen were sitting with each other, opposite parties. It was like prom night, dating. Actually, it was a gimmick, but it was really a good gimmick. These people actually talked to each other. This time, there's none of that. That fig leaf is over. We're in an election season, and if Obama succeeds, the Republican presidential nominee might fail, and that's not going to happen. It's much worse than when Obama took office. Mitch McConnell admitted that he said to his caucus, the single most important thing we can do is make President Obama a one-term president. That hasn't changed.
Jack Hidary, come in on the topic. Do you think that that's really at work? And if so, doesn't that mean that a U.S. business has really got to go it alone?
I think it's a very contentious atmosphere in Washington, D.C. Very difficult to get anything like a $300 billion package passed, particularly when $120 billion of that, Pimm, $120 billion of that is this payroll tax cut extension, which again has not proven to be very effective. Now, is it great to try to go out to the American public and say to each household at the kitchen table, do you want a few $100 extra in your pocket with this payroll tax? Of course, it sounds great on the surface, but you know what? The American public is smarter than that. And they're realizing that that's just a one-time, very ephemeral kind of act, and that's not going to really stimulate the economy to get back on track. So I think the American public is looking for something more meaty, something more substantive than just, hey, here's a few $100 in your pocket. You can't bribe the American public back on track in terms of the economy.
Al Angrisani, you can't bribe the public, but they'll take the money.
They'll take the money. I think we're all saying the same thing. Basically, tonight's about politics. $300 billion stimulus after two bigger stimulus packages isn't going to solve the unemployment problem. So tonight, really, Margaret's right. Tonight's about political posturing, and you're going to start to compare the Obama plan tonight with, for example, the Romney plan, which feels a little bit more like what Jack and I were talking about earlier, capital gains tax cuts. And you're going to start to see the two different philosophies emerge here tonight from what the president's going to push, which top-down Washington stimulus to try to solve the problem. Washington knows best, versus what's going to came out of the Republican primaries yesterday, which is Washington doesn't know anything. The states and the private sector are the solution to the problem.
And we end up living somewhere in the
Pimm,
middle. I want to thank you all very much. We got to leave it there. Al Angrisani joining us from Angrisani Turnarounds, Jack Hidary from Samba Energy, and our own Margaret Carlson joining us from Washington, D.C.